Open, outspoken, it's ophthalmology off the grid, an honest look at controversial topics in the field. I'm Blake Williamson.
Welcome to a new episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid's Survive and Thrive series. In this podcast, Dr. Blake Williamson invites a panel of Drs. Priyanka Sood, Sahar Bedrood, Cristos Ifantides, and Brent Kramer to discuss and compare the differences between private practice and an academic setting. Which is the better fit for each surgeon? Listen in. Support for this podcast comes from Bryn Mawr Communications. BMC produces a number of informative podcast series spanning a variety of topics in ophthalmology. Discover a new show at itube.net/podcasts.
Welcome to another episode of Ophthalmology's Off the Grid Survive and Thrive series. I'm your host, Dr. Blake Williamson, and I'm here hanging out with a few of my good buddies, actually. This is always fun whenever I have people on the podcast who I know and I've had 1 to 2 or 3 glasses of wine with in the past. This always makes things interesting, and it's always going to be conversational, as you know from the podcast. And really what we want to do today is just talk about private practice versus the academic setting. So the last episode, we kind of talked all about fellowships and what type of fellowship should you get into. Should you look at a private practice fellowship? Should you go the traditional route? Well, let's say you're now in your fellowship and you're looking for jobs. Well, one of the most common questions that we get all the time is, do I need to go to the academic setting? Or do I need to reach out to the private setting? So we have several of our colleagues on the call here, and I thought maybe we'd start with Priyanka, just because you have the experience of both. So you're at Emory now, correct? And you were at Emory previously, right? And then you went to private practice. Then you kind of went back. Can you kind of talk about what brought you back? And then maybe we'll bounce it to Sahara, who's telling us, who's going to tell us about she was just in academic setting, and she's just recently gone to private practice. So you guys kind of like are two ships, sailing or passing each other at night. So why don't you start us off?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. It's always a great time to get to chat with colleagues and hear everyone's experiences. I definitely have a very interesting history in that. So I was a resident at Emory back in the day, and then I did my fellowship at Cornell in cornea external disease. And then I stayed on as faculty there for 3 years after my fellowship. And then I decided to try private practice for a couple of years up in Boston, and it was a high volume refractive practice. And then I decided to come back to Emory, and it's been about 5 years since I've been back. And I think that, I was someone who, I also happen to have 2 siblings who are both ophthalmologists as well. And so my sister, the older sibling, had gone into private practice after doing her glaucoma fellowship. And so I think I started residency thinking, well, obviously I'm going to go into private practice. And I, at the time of fellowship, it was the beginning of my fellowship year, and Cornell was looking to hire, and just this idea of staying on with the people who trained me and getting to kind of continue that was really appealing. And I think that one of the things that I really truly enjoy about academics is the camaraderie. I think sometimes that camaraderie in private practice can be really challenging, especially the private practice that I had joined. I was going to 4 different offices. I was the only doctor in any of those offices ever. And for me, that was kind of lonely. I think that ultimately, I came back to academics. I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time because I'd love to get into the discussion afterwards. But another thing that I felt was happening in medicine, and that I think continues to happen, is that doctors have given up control of medicine. And when you're in the private practice world, you have more control. But I think in the grand scheme of medicine, I came back to Emory to become chief of service of the hospital, the Emory Midtown Hospital. And so I go to meetings with other subspecialty chiefs, and I hear about all of the challenges that we face in medicine. And I think it just helps me keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on, because I think that doctors need to take control of medicine again. And I think that if we're not at the table, we are not advocating for ourselves. And we can sit there and say we're advocating for our patients all day, every day in the clinic, and that is a beautiful and important thing. But at the end of the day, as we've seen with insurance companies, as we've seen with all the industries who are continuing to, take control of medicine, if we're not at the table and we're not using the words that the business people use, then we're losing control, and then we lose control of taking care of our patients. So
Sahar, what about you? So where were you? Where were you in practice? And where are you now? And what brought you to that?
So my story goes that I actually did an MD PhD program, and my PhD was in basic science, biochemistry, and the goal and the dream was always academics. There was no question. I was not going to go into private practice. So I finished my PhD. I did my residency at Doheny. Then I went to Wilmer, all these like really academic places, right? And then I landed a job at USC back in Los Angeles. That was my dream job. And after a couple of years there, I was like, I don't know if this was a dream or a nightmare. So it didn't, the department was not well at the time. That's the best way I can say it. For me, it wasn't a good fit. I felt like there was a lot of bureaucracy, and that dream of doing research and teaching and seeing patients was a little bit more challenging in real life, because research is not just given to you. You're not given research time. You have to earn it, and you have to earn it by way of grants. But then you're in the clinic all the time. How are you going to get the grants? So it wasn't flowing in the way that it was supposed to. And I wanted to be high volume surgical as well. So, what did I want really? That was the question I had to ask myself. And I felt like I needed and wanted more clinical and surgical growth. And so I decided to leave academia, and had a bit of an identity crisis for a while, because that is all I knew. That's all I wanted to do. Went into private practice in local to me, and then I recently changed practices, and I'm in a practice called Advanced Vision Care with Nicole Fram in Los Angeles, and it's wonderful. And the differences are, again, after the identity crisis, I realized that I really love doing surgery. I like being high volume. I like just giving clinical care. And from that sprouted so many things: clinical trials, speaking engagements, advisory boards, things that I was able to do because I had that volume and that experience. And so for me, I think I thrived in private practice. I think that it helped me become more successful, but it was a very, very hard transition to leave that after doing a PhD as well. But I don't regret it. I mean, again, like Priyanka, I can go on. And I think that I admire the sense of your purpose for why you were doing, why you went back into academics, to be part of the discussions, to be part of the administration, and those administrative discussions are so important. I didn't want to be part of those discussions, so I left, right? But each of us have to find this sense of purpose and see what it is that motivates us to get up in the morning and do what we want to do. And I think that as long as you're in a place that can really allow you to grow in that way, then you can pick either one, as long as the environment and the people you're working with allows for that growth.
One thing you mentioned was about fit, and really it makes me think about culture, because I bet you there were some private practices that if Priyanka was in, she probably would have loved and probably never gone back, and vice versa with you. I bet you there's some academic centers.
Yeah.
If it was that all that wasn't going on, you'd probably still be there. So it's like it kind of depends not only on who you are, but also the fit. Like I was listening to Priyanka talk about, a lot of the places that I'm going to, a lot of the clinics, I was the only person there, and I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, that's how I do it where I go, because why would another doctor be there? Because you don't want to, you want to get all the volume while you're there, right? But the flip side of that is it is kind of lonely, and I do feel that way sometimes, and I kind of wonder about, like, not myself necessarily, but some of my ODs that work for me. A lot of times they're at a satellite that's 40 minutes away, and it is just them. That way they get all the patients from that day. We don't have that much volume where you could have two doctors in one place at the same time, except for one or two of our locations. So it's weird how that can kind of go either way. On one hand, I'm like, well, yeah, that's going to get you busy if you're the only doc right there that day. But on the other hand, it is kind of, so I don't know. Do you think that culture kind of plays a part in that, Priyanka? And Sahar, do you think that like maybe if you were in a different place, you would still be on the other side of the fence?
Absolutely. There's no doubt. And honestly, I think the thing that I also tell my residents and tell our medical students is you've just got to stay curious, because sometimes you don't even know what it is that you're going to like until you try it. And, I think unfortunately in medicine, we oftentimes have this belief that like our first job has to be our only job, and that like we are really tied because we've built this practice and we've done these things and this just has to be it. And that's just not the case. And I think our business colleagues take it to the whole other extreme, where it's like every 2 years they're at a new like job. We don't have that luxury either, right? Like you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
But I do think that you can give yourself that freedom to say, hey, I'm going to try this and I'm going to see how it works. And then I'm going to stay curious. I'm going to figure out what are the things that I enjoy. I'm going to figure out the things that I don't enjoy. And then I'm going to use that knowledge and try to curate the next level of joy that I want to create in my life. And like, I've been back at Emory for 5 years, and, there's a chance that I might stay here for another 20 years, but also that knowledge that I have empowered myself to know that maybe there is a different step along the way. I think that makes your day-to-day a little bit easier to get through too.
I think culture has a huge role to play in it. And I agree. I think that there are definitely academic centers that I would probably be a part of if it were to be more supportive of my goals. And there are a lot out there. I just didn't happen to live in an area that had them. And I think that there was a statistic, I think you probably have shared it previously or on other podcasts. I've seen that, people change their job. 70% of people don't stay at their first job. Doctors don't stay at their first job. And I was like, oh, that's such a great, I don't even know if that statistic is true, but it's nice to hear that people can change their mind and it's not considered a failure, but rather a growth.
I thought it was 80% actually.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I thought it was 75. Oh my goodness.
Cristos, you jumped in there, so let us know your story. I mean, you were at Colorado, right, which is amazing, right?
It is.
I
Yeah.
know the people there. You got good people there.
Fabulous
So much
people.
some of this comes down to just timing, where you're at in your life. It's not necessarily about fit or culture, just about other goals and that sort of thing. Tell us your story and why are you down in Florida now?
Yeah, so it's so funny because as we were talking about perfect private practices versus perfect academics, I don't think there is such a thing, but Colorado got pretty dang close to being as supportive of their doctors as you can get. Every institution deals with the red tape, and the bigger the institution, the more money that comes through it, the more red tape there is usually. And good leadership tries to cut through that to get you what you need. To get you higher volume, to get you the new technologies, but you still have to deal with the rules, the law of the land. And so big institutions, you can't get around some rules. That is true at every institution. So I do think it's easier to find an academic style private practice than it is to find a true like pure private practice model in an academic setting. And so with that being said, my journey, I always thought I was going to be an academic ophthalmologist. I'm one of the dweebs on my residency application who actually ended up doing the research that I said I love doing. And so, for me, basic science, foundational science, whatever you want to call it, it matters because that's where solutions come from, right? So I've always wanted to be like a solution person. And so for that, I felt like I needed to have that foundational science. I loved chasing it. And so for me, Colorado was an amazing place, really supportive faculty and leadership, gave me some startup funds to do what I wanted to do. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. For me personally, my desire to ask why went past science, went past clinical stuff. And I wanted to know how the business ran. I wanted to know where the money was going, like, how are we supporting all of these different aspects, research, outreach. I was the director of global outreach too. So for me, I really was asking why about many different things. And it's just hard to do that and get, an understanding with such a big organization. I feel like that is one benefit of private practice. If you are really motivated to just understand how things run from a systems level, and have a say in it, it's really, I think, much easier to do that in private practice. I'm fortunate because I found a practice that was not only in the town that I grew up, Cape Coral, Florida, but it's 5 minutes from my parents, which was extremely important as a child of Greeks. I always, was being asked when I was coming to visit what I wanted to eat. It really, after 5 years, is like, I got to get back there. So that was a huge draw, is getting back to family. My brother's family lives here too. But more than just that, finding a private practice that was an academic feel. And Tyson I is where I landed. Toby Tyson is really just a phenomenal surgeon, but entrepreneur and forward thinker. And so as we mentioned about like finding the right group where you can feel like you can share ideas, both clinically and innovation wise, we do have our own practices where we go and practice, but I've only been here for like a month and we're already like texting clinical cases. Dave Stevens is here too, who was a resident when I was a fellow at Wills, which is great. So it just has been great, but it truly comes down to, I think, finding the right type of private practice that fits your needs, or the right type of academic practice. But so far I've been exceedingly happy.
Yeah, so a lot of it, could just be circumstance and timing in life. Being close to family. It's all those things are really important. Brent, you just heard the stat that most people don't end up staying at their first job. So why are you going to be leaving Vance Thompson Vision in 3 or 4 years? Walk us through
Yikes. I was just thinking, Gal, I think I'm gonna just come out and say that I'm probably gonna beat that stat. I
that.
landed a dream job right out of the gate, and I'm really fortunate for it. Part of that was being able to come back home to where I'm from, to where my wife's from. South Dakota might not seem attractive of a place, but it's where our roots are, and we love it. It's home for us. But talking about the practice side of things, that was, I always kind of thought Vance Thompson Vision was they introduced me to ophthalmology. And so that was back when I was an undergrad. And so along the way, I always kind of saw myself in private practice. But man, I've got a lot of core beliefs that really fit into an academic center in regards to advancing the ball with research, maybe not bench research, but some real clinical research. Being able to do academic cases in the OR. And I think those are probably the two big things. Actually, third one that is actually number one is contributing to training future surgeons. So those are the three probably big things that I love about academics that are a lot tougher in private practice. And so to be able to be at a private practice that those are really ingrained into what we do every day, I just lucked out. But man, when I was sitting down a year ago now looking at it, I mean, I had offers from different private practice, private equity, private practice, a couple of physician-owned groups, and then a pretty competitive or attractive academic position. It actually was, I sat down and thought about those things, right? And so I think the recurring theme that I'm hearing though is it's all about the fit, right? You got to evaluate yourself and what do you want out of this, and what do you want out of your career? What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10 and 15-year plan? Where do you want your career to go? And then fitting and looking at a job from that perspective, but then reevaluating, right? I mean, you guys were in awesome jobs, I'm sure, and doing what you love, and then just reevaluating, why am I not super happy? And then finding other jobs that fit those core values. And I think that's where the stat comes from. It's not because 75 or 80% of the jobs out there aren't good. It's because they're not good fits for you. But anyways, Vance Thompson Vision. So what I love about what I do is, one, I get the benefit of just doing high volume surgery. Two, I do get to do research. I mean, we get to do a lot of FDA trials, different IIT stuff. And so we get to ask questions and answer them. And so that's what scientists do. And was, a big reason why I chose a science back before even pre-med, why I wanted to get into something science, right? We like asking questions and answering them, and making the world a little bit better place. But I think what's going to be the really big thing for VTV is having a fellow. It is just so awesome to pour into a trainee, and just kind of be able to mold the future of what ophthalmology looks like in that way. And it's a really it's a privilege, and that's something that I think being able to do that to like residents and fellows, I think is pretty awesome. And one thing I love about my private practice setup, private setup, whatever you want to say.
Brent, I'm going to force you to tell me something negative about it, because there's got to be, because I got a pretty great setup down here too. My name's on the door, but there's problems that I have. Well, I can give you a laundry list of things I don't like about my own practice. So I'm going to force you to do that. But before I do, I just want one thing you said. You know, a lot of times, it's the reason why that stat exists. People don't end up where they started is, I think, because you don't know what you don't know. It's like you don't marry the first gal
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
kiss in sixth grade, right? Like you don't know what you don't know, and so same thing with this. You don't know what you like and what you don't like. You're just trying to get out and get working. So I think that's the reason why. But tell me something you don't like. What's a challenge? Like I'm guessing, because even though I own this practice, but there are some things that I have to deal with. I am told no at times by my administrator or the other partners in my practice. Like it's not a total free for all. And there can be some challenges with that. There's some red tape in private practice too, is my point.
Yes, no, that is very true. I think one thing that has, maybe not that I don't like, but that has been a challenge for me is, man, I came from a really high volume fellowship. I would show up at 7:30 and leave at 6, and all I did was see patients and do surgery. And I saw a lot of patients and did a lot of surgery. And so, especially when you consider it as an academic fellowship. And so, coming into a private practice setup, there is the part where this is a business. And so, I mean, man, I would say on average weekly, and I'm an associate, but I go to all the partner meetings as a surgeon, and so I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of scheduled meetings throughout the day, or per week. So per week, I probably have 2 to 4 scheduled hours of scheduled meetings of things that I didn't go to school for. I don't know all the ins and outs of the finances of a practice and other things. And so what are we doing with healthcare this year? What are we offering healthcare when all those things that you don't know any of that. We weren't taught that. And so learning that on the fly is interesting. And, so that it's just different, right? I mean, we came out and all I was doing was plugging and chugging and taking care of a lot of people and a lot of eyeballs. And now, kind of slowing that down a little bit, still high volume, but now spending my other free time doing some of that practice management stuff, right? The hiring, the separations, all that stuff, managing people, real life chess, if you may. It's more, right?
That's the one I was managing people. But what you start. So I have 192 employees, and what I've learned is there's not two sides to every story. There's 10. There's literally 10
Yes.
sides to every story. And in an academic setting, you have layers of people, HR, all this stuff that can interface. But when you're the face of the practice, like you actually have to get down in there and deal with a lot of that stuff that you don't want to deal with. Priyanka or Sahar or I guess Priyanka in this case, being insulated from some of that, is that a good thing that you can just kind of focus on what you're doing and not have to worry about all the other moving parts, because it's not all your problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the two sides to the coin, because I have a very dear friend who has just started her own private practice this year. And so I very much hear her HR issues. And, on the one hand, in an academic practice, I'm not doing the hiring, and I'm also not doing the firing, but that means I have no choice in who we hire. And so when they're a bad fit, they're a bad fit. And it's a lot harder to fire someone in an academic practice than it is, I think, in a private practice. Not that we're like firing people, but again, fit wise, and whether you get to like say what it is that you think you need, I think is very challenging. But that being said, I'm not necessarily spending my nights and weekends thinking about those things, which I feel like my friend is doing a bit of that. And so I, at this point in my life, I would rather kind of get through my day and just do what I need to do, put my head down and get through it. But yeah, do I have dreams some days of being like, I bet I could build a dream team and it'd be amazing? Yeah. But also I've never done it. So
Yeah, grass is greener. And speaking of grass is greener, Sahar, I mean, after you left academia, you went to one private practice, but now you're in another
Mhm.
private practice.
Yes.
So maybe talk to the listeners that are listening to this right now, thinking, I wonder why she chose another private practice over this one. What are some things that they can ask about if they're considering a private practice? Like if they have, let's say they do want to go back home to Coral Gables, and maybe they don't have a personal relationship with the doctor. What kind of things and questions should they look into when they're interviewing? What things stood out about the practice you're in now versus the private practice you were in previously?
That's such a great question because I was in a practice that was really close to my house. The it was day to day very easy for me. It wasn't challenging. It was just that I without getting into it too much, I think that your sense of purpose and morals and ethics have to match who you're working for. And I wanted to work somewhere where I was really proud of working. And that was important. And I didn't realize that that was important. I thought easy was important, like a 5-minute drive was important, being really close to that, but it wasn't because yeah, it was easy. And I came home and I picked up my kids, but I loved I like being part of this practice. And I love the idea that it's like this big legacy practice and they only hire really good doctors currently. And the patients know when they're going there that they're going to be taken care of, and being part of that was actually really eye-opening. So questions to ask someone, it's hard to see that, right, unless you're a few years in and seeing what you like and what you don't like. And maybe easy is good, maybe that's what people want, but ask about the hours. How many hours a week do you actually really work? Ask about production. Is it hard to make your bonus? That is one thing that's challenging because in academia you're usually salaried, and if you don't see a certain number of patients a day, it's not terribly stressful. You kind of like it. You're like, oh, I had some no-shows. But in private practice, if you have a bunch of no-shows, it was a lighter day, yes, but that's stressful, right? Because then you're like, oh, I got to make up for it next week, and so there is that element too. But looking at who you work for, and how they run the business and what's important to them. And those are things. Priyanka, you're raising your hand.
oh yeah, no, I was just going to say that there's actually lots of different models even within academics. So we're based on work reviews. So if I have a bunch of shows, yeah, I'm similarly not going to see that money at the end of the year.
Okay. Well,
so
good to know.
A lot of like different ways that practices run. But I think there's only one other thing that I just wanted to bring up that I think is another thing that we need to at some point talk about as doctors, which is that did y'all know that lawyers don't have non-competes because they believe that their clients should get to choose which lawyer they actually see, and that non-competes in medicine really only started within the last couple of decades, and that I think it really is a hindrance to us being treated well, especially in these days of private equity. I mean, there are private equities out there now that are telling their new people that they're going to have to sign 5 state non-competes, and it's becoming absurd. And I think that like if we don't talk about it and if we don't change it, then we are all going to be practicing again for these people who make decisions for us and for our lives. And I find it really absurd that it's gone that way. I mean, I agree that there is an art, like businesses, when they invest in you, yes, they need to get their return on their investment. But like after 5 years of you being with a practice, is it more about your name or is it more about the practice's name? I don't know the answer to that, but I have a feeling that it's actually more about the doctor who's providing the care than it necessarily is about the practice that put in an initial investment and they should get that investment back. But there should be a time limit on that and not like, oh, you have to uproot your family for 2 years before you can come back to this city to be able to practice or some kind of 5-state non-compete.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that sometimes those things are hard to hold up, for a lot of reasons, but you still have that, you have to fight it in some states, but you have to fight it, and even if you do win, you're having to fight it, for us, we've never been like that. It's just been in our little town, the only non-compete. our feeling is we're going to be successful no matter if this person is here or not. We want them to be able to not disrupt their family for the reasons that you said. You don't want to sort of vilify for somebody. And in fact, if it's not a good fit, we want them to be outside the practice because they're not happy where they are. So it's actually a good thing to enable them to have to split if they want to. Cristos, why don't you bring us home? You had to pick. I'm guessing you had your pick of places back home in Florida. How did you? Did you do that? Did you kind of ask some hard, tough questions about the framework of the practice and before ultimately deciding where to go? I know that Tyson and I is well known, but similar thing. It's Sahar saying that she wanted to go somewhere she was proud of. Obviously, that's a place she can be proud of. Was that part of it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I asked, pretty widely. I've been very fortunate. People offered to even help me start practice down here. So it meant a lot to have that type of support. I just, and this is probably applicable for people coming out of residency or fellowship. It's harder when you're that young to know what you want to do. And I think the first 5 years or so, I was just trying to figure that out, trying to figure out what opportunities I liked and what I didn't. And I think what it comes down to is, are people giving you opportunities? So the biggest advice I could give is join a practice where people are open about giving you opportunities. You might not know what you love to do yet, but make sure that they're helping you figure it out, which means you might do something that you don't like, or you might find that you really like it. And so that's the important thing. And I think at Tyson Toby and Dave both really want me to thrive. And I felt that when I spoke to them about it. And we just jive, what they want to do, I want to do. And so it was a no-brainer to be in this area and to have people who are like-minded. But if you can find people who want to give you opportunities, who want you to be better, then, when I'm 70 years old, I want to be mentoring people to be better than me. If they're not better than me, I did something wrong. And you want to be around people like that who will make you take those opportunities and be great too. And I did find that.
Well, I appreciate it. This has been a fantastic episode. I think we could probably go on for another half hour. But I think that hopefully this has shed some insight for folks who are trying to make this decision. And I think the biggest thing is maybe take some of the weight out of this. As we said, if it's, don't stress too much. If it's not a great fit, it's okay if you're not there forever. But do your best to take advice that you've learned tonight. Talk to happy people. I always say, always try to find happy people and talk to them and ask them what they do and why they do it. And that's always been my guiding sort of light throughout this whole process. But I appreciate you guys and gals joining me and for this episode of Survive and Thrive. I hope everybody has a great week.
Thank you for listening to Ophthalmology Off the Grid's Survive and Thrive series. And thank you to our guests, Drs. Priyanka Sood, Sahar Bedrood, Cristos Ifantides, and Brent Kramer for sharing their insights with us. Be sure to tune in to the next episode.